This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
Well, something fun is heating up for the Chicago Bears. Per Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated, he thinks that the Chicago Bears are still going to be shoppers for an edge position before the season begins. And with DJ Moore's newest contract restructure that converted his salary this year into a signing bonus, the Bears have even more cap and can make a move. And to go all through this I have a very special guest on today. Brendan Sugrue from the Bears Wire will be covering a little bit more about this and giving his thoughts on who the Chicago Bears should bring in for an edge position. Brendan, welcome to the show.
What's up, Nick? Thank you so much for having me. It's good. It's so good because football's in the air. I know we're recording this right around the time Hard Knocks is coming out, so it's just so exciting to be able to talk about actual football taking place on the field.
And I know that we're talking about edges today, but before we jump into that, how do you feel about the Bears edge position so far at the moment?
Well, it could be better. And I know we're going to talk through a couple options here. And it is exciting knowing that with DJ Moore's latest contract, that there is more cap space that might open up some opportunities that we didn't think about initially. But I think it's okay because obviously you have Montez Sweat. He's the big name there. Came along awesome last year as soon as he came through. I mean, we saw how much he elevated not only the edge position, but the rest of the defense as a whole. DeMarcus Walker is decent. I think when you're asking him to be somebody that can be a run defender, play inside and outside, and don't have to rely on him just for sacks, you're going to be pleased with what he can offer. You might be a little bit deterred with his lack of sacks, unfortunately, but he's still a solid player. Then you have Austin Booker, who has actually shown out quite a bit at camp. He even had some pretty good reps during the Hall of Fame game in the preseason opener. So he's somebody that you don't necessarily want to count on, but you feel good about the upside and what he can give you in his rookie season. Then there's Jacob Martin, Dominique Robinson, Khalid Kareem. One of those guys is going to stick around the roster to be that fourth edge player, but there could definitely be another addition there. We'll see how impactful an addition can be, whoever it might be. But that is kind of the core of the edge position that you're looking at right now. It's okay. It's not as bad as it was last year, but it still could be improved.
Couldn't agree more because I'm really excited about Austin Booker, especially how he played in the Hall of Fame game. And I know we're going to break down a little bit more about who could be even more exciting because you have three options that we're going to talk about today for today's topics. And today's three players that we will be going through that Brendan, you sent over to me is Carl Lawson, Shaq Lawson, and Charles Harris. Excited to break that all down. And before we kick things off, I want you, the viewers, to comment yes below if you want the Chicago Bears to bring in another edge, or no if you think our room of Sweat, Walker, Booker, Dom Robinson, and more are fine where they're at. Along with hitting that like button if you're ready for Chicago Bears football and subscribing to the channel. Brendan, we're ready. Why don't you take us through your first choice, Carl Lawson?
All right, Nick. So let me just preface this because I love you. You're a great guy. We've had a ton of great conversations. I'm just going to say it right now. These three options I think can be options. I don't think they're going to be difference makers though. So I just want to temper expectations before we get into anything because there is a reason all three of these players are unsigned. In the middle, I shouldn't say middle. We're still in early August, but still, it's early August, and none of these players have jobs. So I just don't want anyone expecting that. Oh, this one guy can come in, he's going to get 8 sacks, and everything's going to be fine. No. However, I do think that they could be depth players and offer something in terms of the defense and be a complementary piece to guys like Walker, Sweat, and even Booker. So we'll talk about Lawson first. Carl Lawson, I should say. He's the one that intrigues me the most at this point because he's had the most recent success, I guess, going back to 2022, where he had 7 sacks for the Jets. He signed a big deal with New York. Of course, he got hurt early on, unfortunately, and he maybe wasn't necessarily the same player that he could have been in his mid-20s. He took a major step back last year, but part of the reason for that was because the Jets had better options on the defensive line. Jermaine Johnson showed out. Bryce Huff showed out, and so he was relegated to a reserve role. He only played 6 games. He really only had just, I think, 1 sack. No, 0 sacks, actually. He really didn't register anything. So you're looking at a little bit of a reclamation project, but he's still just 29. He could come in maybe a year removed after his gruesome injury that he had, or 2 years removed, I should say. And now he could be somebody that you're not counting on every down, but he can still get after the quarterback and provide some run support. He did have 9 tackles for loss in 2022, so that's something to be excited about. Again, these guys aren't difference makers, but I think if you're talking about potential upside and the cost would be there, I think he's a decent option.
So, I mean, like, I'm looking at his overall stat. And like you said, 2022 was that big season for him. He brought in, 7 sacks. He looked really good. And overall in his career, I mean, 119 total tackles, 69 solo, 107 quarterback hits. So he can get after the quarterback, 27 sacks, and 28 tackles for loss. Unfortunately, I mean, I wanted Bryce Huff. When you said his name, by the way, I really wanted him in free agency this past year. I think he was a solid player. I think the Bears, I mean, they did a good job with Austin Booker. But, he is a big dude, 6'2", 265 pounds, nearly the same size as Khalil Mack. He can overpower offensive linemen, which makes him super duper difficult. What makes me think about him a lot too is that he is going to have a chip on his shoulder. And, Poles has done a good job at bringing those type of players in and doing a good job. I don't think he would be a starter, but I think he'd be a solid depth piece. And the other thing too is he could be a good mentor in a 1-year rental. But Brendan, what would you kind of give him a contract wise? And do you think he'd get enough playing time? Like from a playing time and contract perspective, what would you give him?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Well, it's not my money. So I guess I would say probably somewhere around $4 to $5 million, maybe 6, maybe another million potentially for incentives. But I would say like a $5 million base with the chance to go up to like 6.5 or so, depending on playing time. I mean, I think that's probably pretty generous, to be honest with you, especially at this point, because the upside is there, because the size is there. I just think there's still a little potential there. And I think if Carl Lawson were to get a team, maybe the Bears, I'd say like 3 or 4 sacks and then maybe, close to 8 or 9 tackles for loss. That would be huge. I mean, you would definitely take that for that amount of money. Think about what Yannick Ngakoue got last year, $10.5 million. He only had I think it was 4 or 6 sacks or something. Understand that he didn't play the last few games of the year because of his broken ankle, but still he wasn't living up to that contract. If you got similar production for half of that, I think you'd be happy with it.
I still can't believe that we paid him $10.5 million last year, by the way. I know the hype was there. I mean, when we signed him, we thought it was the end all be all. We got our edge back. We're good to go. Yanni, he just, it was so disappointing. But when Sweat came here, 2.5 of his sacks I believe he only had 4 on the season last year, were with Montez Sweat. So once he had that going, things were good. I think Carl Lawson would kind of be in that similar situation where, you compliment him with a guy like Montez Sweat. He could get unlocked a little bit more. But also, I think DeMarcus Walker could be in for a big year now, especially because I believe you were one of the people that talked about it, or I saw a tweet somewhere, your name was somehow tied to it, that DeMarcus played only at 75% last year. He was injured most of the season last year. I think he could be in for a big season too. So maybe Carl Lawson, but how do you feel about Walker real quick before we jump into the next Lawson on our list?
Yeah, so Walker is, like I said before, I think if you're just expecting sacks out of an edge rusher, you're going to be disappointed. And when you saw him last year, it's trying to be one of the guys opposite of Yannick Ngakoue, he just wasn't showing up in that department. But you saw how the Bears were able to use him. They were kicking him inside. His run defense was really, really good. He was a big reason why actually the Bears run defense was it got so much better from 2022 to 2023. I mean, everybody wants to give the credit to Andrew Billings, and he deserves a lot of it, but Walker was getting into the backfield quite a bit and able to, overpower those offensive linemen to take down backs for tackles for loss. So I just think if you're expecting this guy to get 8-9 sacks a year, it's just not realistic. That's not his game. But if you get him at 4 or 5 sacks, similar to Lawson, but then you realize the production's coming on those first and second downs where teams can be running, you're going to be a lot happier with them. So an ideal situation, to be honest, is if DeMarcus Walker continues to play those early down roles, he can be a force in the run game. Then you bring in Austin Booker as that pass rush specialist, and he could just pin his ears back and go after the quarterback because of just the different amount of moves they can put against offensive linemen and with his length. So that's the ideal situation. We'll see if it happens. But I didn't know if you wanted to talk about Yannick Ngakoue since we brought him up, because just to peel back the curtain a little bit, when I submitted these names, you're like, oh, Ngakoue's not on there. So I don't know if you're saving that for later, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here.
We're saving it for later. I know
Okay,
like a lot
all
of
right,
people
all
are
right.
watching. I know a lot of people are watching this and they're like, how is Yannick not the first guy we're not talking about? So we are going to talk about Yannick Ngakoue in a little bit, but Brendan submitted this list. And I honestly, when I looked at this list, let's go into Shaq Lawson now, by the way, Brendan. Yeah. So, you know, another Lawson, I don't think they have any relation to each other, at least to my knowledge, but Shaq Lawson, you know, a 6'3", 265-pound, 30-year-old edge. Been in the NFL for 8 years. Another serviceable guy. Had some pretty solid years in Buffalo and actually worked with Eric Washington during his time there. So excited to kind of have that kind of connection, which honestly, out of the three you sent, this was my favorite because there is that connection to Eric Washington already there. But you kind of want to break down why Shaq Lawson could be one of the better ones or one of your options and why.
Yeah, it is mostly familiarity, to be honest. I mean, he is one of the older veterans on this list. He's had past success. He's bounced around a little bit. He's played most of his career with Buffalo. He's played it with Houston as well. Kind of went through some mental health stuff as well. So he had some issues coming back to Buffalo, but he was in a much better place. And I think that just goes to show the kind of culture that the Bills had, that he was able to kind of get right with his mentals and everything. Now, we're talking about his 2023 season. I mean, you're only looking at 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss in 16 games. The familiarity factor is probably the biggest draw for me because I just think his production has kind of dropped off. But if you're looking for somebody who can come in and just be kind of an instant contributor at the very least, I think this is your guy. And again, Eric Washington, he was the defensive line coach. I know that he's now the defensive coordinator. He's still working with the line in some capacity, but this was his position coach. Now, on the flip side, maybe that's also a red flag why Shaq Lawson is still unsigned and the Bears with Washington haven't put out any feelers. Maybe they have, but obviously no signing has happened. So from the outside looking in, it seems like there could be a fit there, but perhaps the work has already been done. Washington doesn't see a fit and it doesn't make sense. But I just think if you're looking for a body who could potentially be somebody who can play 20% of the snaps of the game, be a contributor, be a veteran leader too, somebody who's been around the game and been around a ton of different teams, I think he could be a good option.
I like what you're saying. I think that there is a big red flag considering he hasn't been signed yet. There's been a lot of those Buffalo defensive linemen from last year that are still free agents, and they worked with Eric Washington. So Washington clearly is not seeing something in these. I'm sure if Von Miller, on the other hand, was available, Eric Washington would be like, yeah, bring him over
here. Give him a shot.
give him a shot. He's pretty good. But yeah, Shaq Lawson, he would definitely be a depth guy. I think DeMarcus Walker would be the starter alongside Sweat. He would not come to Chicago and be a starter. And honestly, I would give him maybe a $2.5-3 million contract. Do you think that's fair? Or would you probably have to pay him a little bit more?
No, I think that's more than fair. He doesn't, given his production the last couple of years, he doesn't deserve that type of $5-6 million. I just think, where you do see a little bit of an upside with Carl Lawson based on his more recent production and his age, I don't think you're getting that with Lawson. You're kind of just getting a guy who, again, can be a body, can be a familiar body that Washington and some of these coaches know, who can work in with the rest of the starters.
Couldn't agree more. And I know we have one more to go through, and then yes, we will hit on Yannick Ngakoue, everybody. Don't worry. I know I bet people are like, how have they not still talked about him yet? But quickly, before we go into more about the show today, I am happy to share that today's video is sponsored by BetUS.
Michael Vick at BetUS.com. Catch an incredible 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. BetUS, my online sportsbook and casino.
BetUS is an online sportsbook and casino where you can find so many different betting options. And right now, we are teaming up with BetUS. We are offering a 125% match bonus for up to $2,000 on your first 3 deposits. Make sure you go to the link in the description below and sign up. And throughout the season, if you have a BetUS account, I will be giving 5 people per month $25 free in bets. So if you have an account, make sure you sign up today and go get BetUS. All right, Brendan, let's go now into Charles Harris, the last guy we were going to talk about today before we get into the final comments, which will include Yannick Ngakoue. I know I still love going on Twitter and seeing people are like, why haven't we signed him yet? But let's go into Charles Harris a little bit, who is familiar with the NFC North, playing for the Lions most recently. A 29-year-old, 6'3", 250-pound edge, has been in the league for 7 years. Why did you put him on your list as well?
One word: versatility. He is a guy that has played the outside backer position. He's played a little bit of inside defensive line, outside defensive line, and he's had various degrees of success with it. So not going to move the needle much, but when it comes to what Matt Eberflus likes to run, he likes guys he can put in different positions, hence like we talked about with DeMarcus Walker. So with Charles Harris, he's somebody who can play the edge. They can move him in if need be. His best season came in 2021 when he was an outside backer with the Lions. He had 7.5 sacks. He had double-digit tackles for loss. Since then, though, they gave him a contract extension. Had not lived up to it, so he was cut this past offseason. He had just 1.5 sacks and 2 tackles for loss in 2023, but he's still relatively young. I believe he was a 2017 first-round pick, so draft status doesn't mean anything at this point, but I just think sometimes it's worth noting. And yeah, I think with somebody like that, you can stash at the back of the roster who can play both of those positions and be a little bit of a contributor there. He has familiarity with the NFC North. Never hurts to bring in division rivals. So I think there's a little bit of opportunity there for Harris.
And he was a captain on Detroit too for, I think, 2 seasons when Detroit was going through the really dark days of the Lions before Dan Campbell showed up. So he has that leadership experience too. So I like Charles Harris a lot. I think he could be a good option, but I'm talking a 1-year, $2 million contract with incentives. Is that where you're leaning, or do you think he's worth a little more?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're on lockstep here. Like these contracts they're getting lower and lower, just because there's limited upside, and these guys are free agents for a reason in August, like we talked about. You got to temper the expectations as well as temper the money. You're not going to overpay for an edge at this point in time. So a couple million, if that. And yeah, you get somebody who can move around the defensive line.
I think you just hinted that we're going to be the next great GM and assistant GM role for the Chicago Bears after Poles and Cunningham are done in probably 20 years when we win a couple of Super Bowls. Let's go into the final comments because, like you were kind of saying, it's August. There's still free agents out there, and one of them is Yannick Ngakoue. Are you on the train of re-signing him? I mean, he obviously knows the defense. He worked with the Bears all the way up to March 12th, I found out. Like, he lived in Chicago to work with trainers. Obviously, he has to work with his own now after free agency. But are you on the train, or are you staying away from Yannick as long as possible?
No, I would say I'm still on the train. I'm just looking at different options. And I also want to, as we talked about, this is the moral of the episode here, temper expectations. I still think it is very possible that the Bears get a deal done with Ngakoue because of the fact that there is the familiarity. He has been working out. I do know from, talking with some people, the two sides have been in contact. I think the money is just way too far apart right now. So potentially one side is going to have to give. But I also am a little bit worried about where he's at health-wise. A broken ankle is tough to come back from. And I know Yannick posted some videos of him doing some drills and everything. He's like, I'm ready to go. And man, I'm just looking at those videos and I'm like, that's not great. It's hard to judge somebody from just looking at the way that they're running on air and they're just trying to get their feet going. But I just was not impressed. I didn't see burst. I didn't see too much speed. I see a guy who, and this is so unfair to say because we're speculating about injuries. It's tough, especially when, somebody who myself had a pretty decent knee surgery back in the day. But I got to say, I just was not impressed with those videos. And I think that if you're going to sign Yannick to a 1-year deal this year, you're not going to get the most out of him. I looked back at some other defensive ends like Tyson Alualu, linebacker Drew Tranquil. Both of those guys broke their ankles, and I believe they were both in the early part of the season. The next season, they really were non-factors. Now, Drew Tranquil, since this was a few years ago, so he's obviously been a very good linebacker for the Chiefs. He bounced back. But my point is, while I think Yannick could bounce back, I just don't think he's going to bounce back for the 2024 season. Keep in mind, he broke his ankle in December. It is August still. So there's a very good chance that he's still going through some things and he may not be 100% for the entire year. So I just worry about bringing him in on a deal that could be like $5 million, $6 million a deal a year, that he's just kind of a non-factor. And I almost want to take a look at other guys whose injury records are maybe a little bit cleaner at this time. Now, let's say Yannick, either he works his way through it this year or he sits out, whatever, and he still wants to come back next year, I would be more than willing to look at that and be very on board with it. Now, if the Bears do sign him, I'm not going to be like throwing up my hands, because I think they still could use a guy, and competition means everything in this league. So if you have somebody that can push Walker and push Booker and be somebody that Sweat can work with, and he does wind up becoming a good player again, okay, great. Like I'm all for trying, but I just worry that we're not going to get to that point this year, just of when his injury happened and what his injury was actually.
I couldn't agree more. And going back to the videos comment real quick, he ran around like the field goal post a couple times. I was like, wow, I could go that fast kind of deal. I was like, is that ankle truly okay? Like I'm with you. We paid him a ton of money last year. He didn't live up to expectations. You know, I was expecting at least a 6-7 sack season, and he started to heat up at the end, but like you said it best, it's been 8 months now and he still isn't healed. Almost 9 months now, actually. And he still isn't healed up. A little bit concerned about that. So it sounds like you're not going with Yannick. And Brendan, before we close out, in 30 seconds, out of these 4, we came up with 3, but really we had 4. Who are you taking and why?
Carl Lawson, just because I still think the upside is there. He's not going to cost too much. And I like with his age and everything. And the fact that, look, because he didn't play last year, he still has reps to use. But look, when I submitted these names initially, this was before DJ Moore's contract came out. So the fact that they did create a lot more money, it tells me that Poles could still make a big move during the season to bring in another edge, kind of like what they did with Montez Sweat. Who knows if that's going to be somebody like Hassan Reddick or whoever. It's way too early to tell, but that could also be the area that the Bears go and just kind of see how this season progresses, because that's been Poles' MO the last couple of years. Let's find a guy that we think can help us now and into the future.
Couldn't agree more. I'm with you. Carl Lawson's my guy as well. I still think he's got a little bit to prove, and he's got a chip on his shoulder. So definitely a big fan of that. But Brendan, thank you so much for coming on today. And quickly before we leave, where can everyone find you and your work?
You can find me at Brendan Sugrue on Twitter. That's SUGRUE. Check out my work at thebearswire.com. We're releasing multiple articles a day. I usually have one coming out every single day, along with our awesome staff. And then you can check out our podcast, the Bear Down Chicago podcast. We should have episodes coming up again soon as the preseason continues to roll. But Nick, it's always good talking Bears with you, man. It's great to see you, and really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And we'll obviously do this again. And just so everybody knows, everything's in the description below, so you can go and find his work. But this was a lot of fun today, and hopefully there's some sort of signing soon. Thank you again for joining, Brendan. Really appreciate it. And thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of Just Another Year Chicago Bears. My name is Nick Rohde, and we will have breaking news for you moving forward. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. And as always, let's hear it loud and proud. Bear down, baby.